name is James Payne and I'm the author of Great Art Explained.
And hello, welcome everybody. My name is Leslie Primo and I'm the author of The Foreign Invention of British Art.
So welcome to our first podcast, which is going to be about class. So maybe first of all we should talk about our backgrounds and why we feel like we are qualified to do that. You go first or?
Yeah, no, after you, James.
Okay, so I am from a very working class background. My dad was a lorry driver, my mum was a cleaner, there were 4 kids. We only ever lived in council flats, or as you call them in America, government assisted housing. I was encouraged not to do further education and to leave school at 16 because people from that background, and I'm talking about the 1970s, they wanted another income in the house. So I eventually left school at 16 with no qualifications whatsoever. So that's my background.
Well, there we go. I mean, it sounds pretty similar to my background, actually. I was encouraged not to continue at school, but not by my parents, because they didn't know what was going on anyway, really. I was encouraged to not continue at school by my tutors. So my tutors at school said, it doesn't seem as though you're going to actually do much, so don't bother to take the exams. So I did it. So I was told, of course, I didn't take any exams and therefore didn't get to the sixth form clearly because I didn't take any exams, left school with no qualifications whatsoever. In that respect, James and I are on the same page.
So I think it's really interesting is that for me in particular, I don't see coming from that background as a disadvantage. In fact, the opposite. I see it as an advantage. I think the interesting thing about coming from the type of background that we come from is the only way is up. You can't stay at the same level or go below. So whatever you do, your aspirations can be high and can be met, you know. So I think it's interesting. But one of the main focuses of this podcast is also going to be how different it is nowadays. You know, how someone like me and like you possibly can't succeed in 2025.
Has it got harder, James?
Has it got harder indeed?
Yeah.
So we're going to look at that, look at class in different ways as well.
Yeah.
And why class privilege is a problem.
Yeah. But of course, along the way, we will be looking at the works of different artists as well, and talking about those artists and their works and how their works are received as well. And what about artists that are supposedly from working class backgrounds, or what about their work? Is their work representative of working class backgrounds as well? And how is that viewed in galleries today by the public?
Yeah, so it's an exciting series we're going to do, and it's looking at working class from so many different ways, because working class can be seen from so many different ways as well. I do believe, however, that meritocracy in the art world is a myth. I really do believe that. I think that people given a start in life, either by wealth or by background or by power, are very different to kids coming up from the working classes, particularly those who live outside the main cities.
Yeah, we're not starting from the same position, are we?
No.
No one is really starting from the same position. This idea of a meritocracy and you just work hard, then you'll make it is not really a reality actually in that way. This is what James W. Turner says about this. He says that what we call genius is not alone sufficient. Great industry and application must be joined with it, without which it would be better for young men to apply in some time to other professions. So what he's saying here is that you've got to work hard. But is that really true?
Well, I don't know, because another great working class artist, William Blake, he talks about mind-forged manacles, you know, in his poetry. Yeah. And that is that you start with manacles, you start with being imprisoned, you know, because it's not about a working class kid at 16 starting from the beginning, because it starts way before that as well. So the privileges start a long time before that, and as you say, it's not a fair starting block.
Yeah, so James W. Turner's doing us a disservice here, isn't he, by saying it's just all about great industry, as he calls it, and then genius is not enough, he says. It's about great industry. Yeah,
unfortunately, he was a genius, so you know, he is one of the exceptions to the rule. So he wasn't lucky at all. He was just a genius. So
what I'm saying is, do you think then that people who are an exception to the rule don't realise that they are an exception to the rule.
Possibly.
I think, well, I've made it, so you can as well.
I think this is a big, big thing.
Yeah.
The thing is that I am super happy with my career, and you are super happy with
Indeed,
your
I am,
career.
yes,
We did come from these backgrounds,
but
then we've gone on to have these amazing careers in the arts, including writing these books.
Yes, indeed.
So that is incredible that we've done that. But then for us to say, well, if I can do it, then you can do it, is totally wrong, because I was an incredibly confident child. I didn't put up with any crap. I didn't listen to people when they told me I couldn't do something. But what we're talking about, the reason we're interested in this is because there's a kid out there who is not confident.
It's about confidence, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's about confidence. Yeah, it is about confidence. And that isn't something that really just comes automatic.
No.
Is it really? Some people just aren't that confident. Really.
Yeah.
I must say, I've always been really confident in everything I do, including going into art galleries. Even that takes confidence, just to walk into an art gallery. I've always believed that I belong in the art gallery, so I'm going to walk into the art gallery. Clearly, whenever I do go into the gallery, people say, could you tell me where the toilets are, and why aren't you wearing your security jacket,
really?
And things like that. No, I had that a few times, really, and I have to tell them I'm not security, that I'm actually here visiting the gallery just like you, and then they get really shocked.
That's interesting, because, race, gender, class, these are things that do stop people going into spaces like this.
You can imagine
my mother wouldn't even dreamed of going into the Tate.
There you go.
Wouldn't even thought about it, And
if you're not a confident person, and then you are confronted with somebody who's decided that you're a security guard since you come through the door, that's not going to make you want to go any further, is it really?
No.
It's going to, and let's be clear, it's not the staff at the National Gallery that are saying these things. These are other visitors to the gallery who are saying these things, who are mistaking you as a security guard. So it's people's expectations.
Yeah.
And if you're not confident, and as confident as I am, you're not able to brush that thing off and carry on with what you're doing.
I do think we're very lucky, because the vast majority of my friends from my background were not quite so lucky. And by lucky, I mean we were lucky to be confident people, because creative confidence is something you learn. So that is a learning process. For example, if you're starting from an area where you have to go to work when you're a kid. You have to look after other kids in the family, all those kind of things. There's no nannies are involved and stuff like that. You don't have time. Time is an important thing.
What else are we going to cover in this first podcast, James? What are the things that are really getting your goat?
I think goat has got a different meaning these days. But,
it has, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I am interested in how we can level up that playing field. I'm very interested in that. And also how we can encourage people from different classes to go into the arts, because it is harder. That's the thing. It really is harder. Schools now are cutting funding, all those kind of things. So it's to give people examples, to use JMW Turner as an example, to use William Hogarth as an example, Tracy Emin, David Hockney, all these people. These are examples of people who do succeed and do get going, and maybe give people practical steps as how we can do that. But what gets my goat mostly is inequality in any form whatsoever. I think we should all be given an equal footing, and we're not.
We're not. No, indeed, yes. So one of the things, of course, that makes us able to step above others is how you speak and how you sound, as it were. And those things are really important. If you've got the right kind of voice, as it were, then suddenly you can be doing something quite extraordinary. I just want to read something else. Turner is also a victim of this. So Turner became subject to that typical sort of sniping, sort of British criticism thing. And one of the critics observed Turner at the Royal Academy, remarking that there is an embarrassment in his manner approaching almost unintelligibility, and a vulgarity of pronunciation astonishing in an artist of his rank and respectability. This idea of having a go at somebody because they've got the wrong kind of accent, and therefore you shouldn't really be here, shouldn't you? You shouldn't be in this building, you shouldn't be at the Royal Academy.
Accents are really a very interesting thing, because of course Turner had a pronounced London Cockney accent and was very heavily criticised for it when he was giving lectures at the Royal Academy, all that kind of thing. And accents to this day, I think an interesting thing is, if you're not British, then you probably don't realise that Leslie and I don't sound like we're from working class backgrounds.
No.
You can pick it up, but we don't sound like we're from working class backgrounds.
No, that's why I brought up this particular anecdote from Turner's time.
And also another interesting thing about Turner, people criticise him for wanting to make money. It was a very bad thing for the classes to want to make money.
Yes.
And in fact, working classes these days get criticised for self-promotion and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
Not that we would ever do anything like that.
Not that we would ever do any kind of self-promotion whatsoever.
No.
But anyway, let me tell you why I don't have a very broad London accent.
Yes, James. Do reveal.
Because my family all talk with a very broad London accent.
Yeah.
What some people call a Cockney accent, because I was born in London.
Mm.
But I went to live in France when I was very young. As an adult, I was in my early 20s.
Sort of thing that working class people do?
I was, an exception. So,
Right, yeah.
I mean, Turner was an exception in the fact that he travelled so much.
He did,
working class people very, very rarely left their villages.
Turner travelled to Venice on several occasions. And also to the Low Countries as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, as they were there, yeah.
So I moved to France.
Yeah.
I couldn't speak French. I just moved there on a whim. I just left. Now, if I talk like that, like the background I come from, to French people who couldn't speak English or could barely speak English, they wouldn't understand a word I said. So I learned to speak slowly and articulately so that they would understand me. Because I lived in France for 7 years, my accent just disappeared. So now I have this kind of bland, nothingy accent.
Did you learn French?
And now I speak fluent French. Yes.
Right.
I really have lost my accent. In fact, my family call me posh. Where's your accent come from?
Yeah. Certainly not from my background either.
Right.
No, look, let's be clear. My brother, who's my older brother, has in fact the same accent as mine, actually.
Right.
But the rest of my family are all absolutely Cockney, and in fact they all live in Essex.
Right. Okay.
So they've got like an Essex accent, as it were. I speak like this because, well, I got obsessed with words and language and dictionaries at school. Even though I failed English, I was still obsessed with dictionaries. In fact, I was called Mr. Dictionary at school, which I found was pejorative at the time. But anyway, I got obsessed with that. But what I realised is that my obsession with words stretched to the point of articulation of words and also diction. I became obsessed with diction as well. And if you're obsessed with diction and you're obsessed with words, it does affect the way you actually speak.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking about the words, you're thinking about diction, you're thinking about pronunciation, etc., and so on. And then you become more obsessed. And the more obsessed you become with those, the more it starts to, I suppose, make you speak in a particular way.
Yeah. I've forgotten how to speak like I used to. Like what I used to.
Well, I can still say batteries.
Batteries.
Yeah.
Mother. But we've spoken about this before, how we come from this background, and neither of us have chips on our shoulder. We're just just really happy to be where we are. But I do think the accent, for me anyway, is a little bit of acting as well. I think there's a little bit of putting on a front.
There's a performance about it.
Performance, because accents. People outside the UK don't realise how important accents are.
They are very important, really. And I must say, I really love regional accents without sounding too patronising. I think they're absolutely brilliant. They've got colour and warmth, depending on what part of the UK you're from. But getting back to what we are looking at today, of course, and that is, of course, the art world itself and actual artists. Have you got a favourite artist, James?
Have I got a favourite artist? My favourite artist, I think Turner is up there for 100% for sure. I like his personality, and I love his works, and then in a similar way, someone who is very much influenced by Turner, I love Rothko as well. So I tend to like work which is quite abstract.
Abstract, and Turner is sort of that beginning of abstraction, isn't he?
Beginning of it. We'll be talking about that. Yeah. What about you? Do you have a favourite actor, a favourite artist?
Favourite artist? This is the thing that I asked you that question because people keep asking me it all the time.
Okay.
And I can never really come up with anything because the thing is, I have a favourite artist. At the time, I'm working on that artist. They're my favourite artist at the time. But having a favourite artist constantly, well, I suppose the only constant in my life in terms of artists must be Leonardo da Vinci. Really. Right. I studied, of course, Renaissance art and art history, so it's Leonardo I think because he's such an all-rounder, because he's absolutely curious about everything. and it's so curious about everything, it stretches beyond merely producing art. There are barely 15 paintings that exist by Leonardo, yet there he is up as the greatest artist of all time. But in fact, for him, that's just part of what he's interested in. What he's interested in is everything, and he's curious about everything. I'm interested in everything, I'm curious about everything, and I'm constantly wanting to learn new things, whatever the things are. I need more input, and I like to say, I have no idea what you're talking about, tell me more. That's my favourite go-to. I don't know what you're on about, really, I just really want to know some more.
I think Turner was the same, very much. Like, we have to keep going back to Turner, but he was very much interested in everything, mathematics, etc. So, but it'd be interesting now to talk about maybe the Renaissance, as you are an expert, and particularly how the working classes could get into those workshops.
I looked at this today and I kind of thought to myself, of course, yes, there were quite a lot of workshops these workshops throughout the Renaissance period, and quite a lot of artists got into these workshops and got paid as well for being in these workshops, and found their way in the 1470s, for instance, the Pollaiuolo workshop, the Verrocchio workshops that operated in Venice in the 1470s, 75, that sort of period, took a lot of people into their workshops, and they were paid a small nominal wage, as it were. And of course, people like Andrea del Verrocchio, his workshop, Botticelli was in that workshop, Leonardo da Vinci was in that workshop, Perugino are all in this extraordinary workshops. They all came out of these workshops amazingly.
It was a great escape, a route out for working class people.
Yeah, just as nowadays the route out maybe is becoming a footballer, isn't it, really? Or maybe becoming a boxer.
Yeah, by the Renaissance, they're looking towards it as being superstars,
Yes. That's much later, though, isn't it? I mean, we'll probably have to do a podcast on that as well.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Another thing I'd like to talk about before we move on is nepotism. So because it's been in the news so much with Kate Winslet and Rocco Ritchie and all those people, it'd be kind of interesting to discuss it, because you had a very interesting take about nepotism.
I did indeed, yeah. Well, my interesting take about nepotism is that, in fact, it's been around for a long time, hasn't it, really? And I made some notes about nepotism as well, because in fact there are plenty of examples of nepotism within the history of art. For instance, we know that the Bellini clan of Venice, they were a clan of artists. So of course you had Jacopo Bellini, the father, then you had of course Giovanni Bellini and Gentile Bellini, the eldest of them. So effectively they become a sort of dynasty. And then you've got the Bruegel dynasty as well. So all of them become artists as well. Lots and lots of Bruegels, all from the Low Countries, all became artists. So you've got a whole plethora of different dynasties that become artists.
Like the Bosches as
well. The Bosch as well. Hans Holbein the younger, Hans Holbein the elder, of course. Hans Holbein the younger is the one that we know, of course, and he's the one, of course, who's on the front of my book.
When we talked about this before, I was thinking about, for example, these days, if Lucian Freud came up, would we say, oh, hold on, he came from Sigmund, So it's like, would we criticise him? Yeah. But I think the attitude has changed. I think the attitude, I think the Bellinis, they were going into a craft, they for example. Mm-hmm. But I do think the issue is with nepotism in the modern day is that no one else is being given a break. That's what I think.
Well, they're sort of crowd in the field now.
I think that you can't blame them. It's not their fault. That doesn't mean they're not talented either. But I think the problem is that it's not being acknowledged. I think that, and also I think it's being ignored a little bit as well. I think that's an issue.
But is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the. It's like when I wish my mother was Madonna. I wish that I did get that hand up, that head.
I wouldn't say no.
But that doesn't mean that he's not talented. That doesn't mean that Kate Winslet's children are not talented. But a 21-year-old writing a script that gets published for the first time, that doesn't happen very often unless someone else is involved, unless you've had those introductions. So it starts so much earlier than this. And I think that for some people, they don't realise that they are being given a hand up.
I think in the end, nepotism is about trying to what you're trying to do is help your friends and family, aren't you?
Who wouldn't do that?
Yeah, who would help their friends and family?
Yeah, although I think if I had a kid and they weren't very talented, I'd tell them. It's like
yeah, but if you had a kid, James, you'd go, God, he's so talented.
That is the issue.
Yeah,
I do think that sometimes nepotism is blatant, and I think that's an issue for me. I think sometimes nepotism is not acknowledged, and that's also an issue for me.
So as long as it's acknowledged, it's okay then?
No, it's not. They have to have talent as well. I think I think talent will come through.
Yeah, but Kate Winslet's not going to go, oh, my son's useless.
No, she's not. But yeah, I mean, but he's not useless. You know, he's written a script that's being made into a film. Hollywood are not going to back a film that is written by a useless writer. He's probably a good writer, but why is he a good writer?
Because he's got the background.
He's got the background that and also Kate Winslet said, if it wasn't for me, he still would have made it, and that's true because it's true because his dad is Anthony Minghella.
Yeah,
so it's like, so that's true.
Well, that makes sense.
But so why doesn't Hollywood have projects to help working class people get into work? Why is it every single gallery I go to in London, every single blue chip gallery in London, there aren't working class people working in there? Why aren't there schemes to help those people?
But James,
there are.
Let's be clear. It's about establishing a brand, isn't it? Really, and if you have a brand behind you, clearly people are going to back you, aren't they? Really.
Of course, you have to have the skill in the first place to get in there in the first place. But you've been given that skill because you had a leisurely childhood. You had a childhood where you had extra lessons. You had a childhood where you went to a private school. We forget about private schools, and private schools are an important thing because you and I went to state schools. And the thing is, at private schools, I have so many friends who have kids in private schools, and I'm not going to criticise them because schools are appalling in some parts of the country, and I'm not going to criticise them. However, let's not ignore the fact that it gives you a lift up. Private school is not just about education; it's about the contacts you make. Contacts are really, really important, and it's why I'm really happy to self-promote my own book. I'm not ashamed of selling my book, because I didn't meet people at these elite schools or elite colleges.
Nope, neither did I.
Neither did you, so we don't have the connections that possibly other art historians or writers have.
So in a way, we're playing catch up, aren't we? Really?
Yeah,
we're playing
catch up.
Yeah.
Brilliant way. In fact, maybe we should call the podcast Catch Up.
Catch Up. We
are playing catch up.
We are. Yeah.
The thing is, you and I are really happy with the way our lives have turned out. I am so happy, and I've had an amazing life. I liked all the little.
You're not dead yet, James.
No, I'm not dead yet, but I liked all the detours that my life has taken. I think it's interesting, and it's made me, where I am right now, which is a good place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But let's not deny that it gives you a lift in life, and maybe we should use that as a way of looking after people who don't have that lift in life.
That's what we're doing, aren't we, at the moment? Because when I decided, when we both decided to make this, really, I thought, who do I know who I can get involved in this? Because, in fact, what we're doing is getting people that we know to actually make this happen. Without those people that we know, this wouldn't really happen, is it? Really?
Totally,
yeah. So is that a form of nepotism, James?
Is it a form of nepotism? I'm not really sure. I don't know. I think I love your take on nepotism. I think it's genius. The fact that Bellini, is he a nepotist? Is Lucian Freud involved in nepotism? And I think in a way it is a bit like us. The strong, even if you're from a posh, rich background, only the strong are going to survive in the art market because but let's say, for example, some of these kids are very wealthy people, when they first start doing their paintings, and they didn't go to art school because they didn't want to go to art school, they're doing their paintings and they're selling them to their parents' friends, in the same way that going to a blue chip gallery in London, they're selling them to their friends.
You've sold a lot of art to the people that own this house, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Because I had an art gallery and I sold art. But it was a little bit more difficult for me because I didn't have those initial connections.
And I'd just like to say now that we do not own this house, and it's not our house. We just don't have this kind of money, really.
I certainly don't want to criticise anyone specifically. I've mentioned specific names, but it's not a criticism of them. I think the issue for me is always the same. My ethos is democratizing art, and that's through different ways. That is on my YouTube
And that's something
channel.
we can definitely agree on, really, democratizing art. I've spent 18 years working at the National Gallery. Absolutely wonderful. Loved it. Great place to work. I still go in there and take groups of National Gallery on regular tours, really, which you can sign up to on my website. But But it is a particular crowd of people, a particular type of people, and they're all very nice people. I'm not really reaching the kid in Brixton, the kid in Peckham, the kid in Hackney, etc. So, why want to do that? And that's why I'm doing this, because I want to reach those people, really.
Yeah.
Because they're not the sort of people who are going to be in my audiences at the National Gallery and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we do talk about broadening the scope of art history in general, and I do think, my channel is I'm very much interested in a kid from Wisconsin or a kid from Ipswich, somebody who doesn't have access to museums.
Yeah.
The talk always is about getting people into museums, getting footfall. And that's always what the talk, but I'm really more interested in the kids who don't have any access to museums.
Yeah.
Because we were lucky. We grew up in London.
Yes,
we were very lucky because
school trips.
Let's say for example, when I was a kid, the Metropolitan Museum in New York was probably about $8 or $9. It's now getting on for more like $30. So a poor kid in New York from a big family, no way would they have gone to them. But I think the difference is in London, you've always had access to free museums.
Yes, we have,
except for a very short period under Margaret Thatcher.
Yes,
but you've always had access to free education. And I think for me personally, when it was the summer holidays, if you're not British, we have 6 weeks summer holiday. And if you've never been to this country, you'll know it rains a lot. As it is raining right now. And so you'll know that quite often me and my sister were sent out on buses to go to museums to get out of the rain. They were open spaces where you could meet.
And I noticed that, James, that you mentioned museums and education in almost the same sentence, as though going to a museum is an education.
It is, It is an education. I think we are very lucky if you live in London to have that access. But I'm also interested in a kid who lives in in the countryside or lives somewhere else. Yeah. And I think you can democratize that through books. You can democratize that through YouTube channels or through social media. Yeah. And social media is a very interesting thing because it has become a democratizing force against the wishes of much of the art establishment.
Indeed. I'm still stuck in television, by the way, with programs like The Renaissance, The Blood and the Beauty on BBC iPlayer, and of course the new Turner documentary, the Secret Sketchbooks. But I'm finding that in the end, that was my route to try to democratize art. But it turns out that actually what I should have been doing is this.
You are a brilliant presenter, and you do make these amazing programs for the BBC. This again is another age thing as well, because when we grew up, there was 3 or 4 television channels.
That's it.
So I can remember very clearly as a kid watching BBC Two, watching a ballet, thinking, what the bloody hell is this? What is it? Yeah. But you had no other choice. There was nothing else on any other channel. So, whereas now, the BBC are a great institution, but
there was a time on television, of course, that you couldn't say bloody hell either. Really.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you've just said it here on YouTube.
I'll say it again. So, but it's how do we democratize art? But we're always talking about democratizing art, but it never actually happens. And I think there are ways of doing it. I do think something we criticize very heavily, like Instagram and YouTube, there's a lot of lousy stuff out there. There's a lot of bad stuff out there, but there's also a lot of good stuff out there, like this podcast, for example.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is really good.
So a working class kid today, first of all, parents are, they'd love to help their kid to become an artist. How can they become an artist? Can they study at art school? You can't afford to send all your kids to art school, Where is that kid going to go to art school? St Martin's in London. He can't afford to live anywhere, It's a different period of time. So there's all these barriers pushing you against.
I must say, I do know parents who've said, stop being an artist, don't do it, and try to discourage their kids from being artists because they think they're going to be poor.
Well, there is that, but then, the reason I brought it up is because social media has become a democratizer in a way, because people who can't afford all those things we talked about, imagine trying to get a studio in London, how much that would cost for an artist. However, you can be in Ipswich, the place I keep mentioning because I live near there now, where there aren't many facilities. You can get a much cheaper studio, and you can put your work on Instagram, and you can, and that has become a democratizing force. Or YouTube. You know, you could if you got the right facilities.
I often think though, James, if the artists that I studied when I went to university as an adult, by the way, if the artists that I studied had all these opportunities, would they be availing themselves on? Would Leonardo think, oh, well, I like this AI stuff, maybe I could use that instead? I have to think maybe they probably would.
Leonardo definitely.
Yeah, definitely would use it, wouldn't he? Yeah, you know. So in a way,
would Hieronymus Bosch be on YouTube?
Yeah, I think he would. I went to an immersive.
I don't think he would.
I went to an immersive experience of Hieronymus Bosch in Berlin.
Well, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it wasn't that good. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
If there's one thing not to get me started on, is immersive experiences.
Yeah, you don't think they're a good thing, immersive art?
I think they're good for what they are.
Yeah, for what they are. It's terrible.
I've been to one. 10 minutes I last in Paris. Paris invented them, of course.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, Paris invented it. It's Son et Lumière, you know. So they invented it with the Van Gogh in their music first of all. And I went to one, and I lasted 10 minutes.
I went to Tea Lab in Tokyo. I was in there for a couple of hours actually.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think for what they are, they're good. They're a great introduction to art, actually.
I think they are. Yeah, they've got their place.
It's not my cup of tea.
No. Yeah. Well, you know, I wouldn't know. I don't drink tea.
It's not my cup of coffee.
Don't drink coffee.
Okay, well, it's not for me. These are other ways of people being introduced to art. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, who's being introduced to art, Leslie, please? Because let's say, for example, the Van Gogh one that was in London a few years back, it was £25 to get into.
Yes, they were expensive.
Who can afford that?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Who can afford that?
And that is the problem, isn't it? And if you've got a family as well, and you know, kids really love those immersive things, you could end up spending £200 just to go for a day in these immersive art.
So is it democratizing art?
Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it, really? They are really expensive.
Yeah.
The David Hockney one that was on recently in London apparently was really brilliant.
Yeah.
I didn't go to it. A lot of my students went to it. I didn't go to it because I thought, well, I can't afford it.
Yeah.
It's just too expensive.
I think, we can talk about democratizing art. Our books are in libraries. You can go to a library and get a book out. Libraries are being forgotten about in this day and age, and libraries, they're the backbone of our community.
But let's be clear, though, libraries haven't been forgotten about, James. It's just that local government, local councils no longer want to fund those libraries because they don't have any money, so they've withdrawn the money services from those particular services because it's not an essential service like the taking out the bins, etc., and the water and so on and so on. So libraries. Speaking as a former librarian myself, in fact, I was a music librarian for 7 years actually, so I know a bit about the library service. And of course, even then, when I was a librarian back in the 90s, yes, that's how old I really am, even then, back in the 90s, libraries were really severely underfunded. And indeed, the libraries that I used to work at no longer exist. So even if you wanted to get these books in the libraries, you'd have a hard chance trying to find libraries. In fact, there are probably more branches of banks than there are libraries now.
That is true. I mean, I think my inroad to art was through libraries, actually. So that's how I... 6 or 7 years old, being taken to libraries.
Same here. That was my inroads. Yeah, because I was a music librarian, by the way, not just a book librarian.
What's a music librarian?
That's where you have only CDs for people to take.
Is that
CDs.
job finished now?
It doesn't exist anymore, I'm afraid. But I was a music librarian. But in fact, that was the upper part of the library. But downstairs in the library was the books. And because back then I wasn't studying art history, of course, but they had an art history book section. So as a librarian, I could take books out on extended loans for as long as I wanted and not get any fines, because I'd come in the next day and erase all my fines for extending my books.
So if the Metropolitan Police are listening right now, they want to get hold of you. For example, my local library in Suffolk, where I live now, they have to raise funds. It's outrageous, really. But the point is, when I was writing my book, I actually used my local library to get art books out, art history books. Because they cost so much money. There is the facility if you want it. My book can be taken out of a library and you can find a library. It's just whether you have access to it or not.
I must admit,
YouTube is free.
YouTube is free,
Instagram is free. There are some brilliant people doing history on Instagram. 3-minute history takes, which are, is the attention span.
Well, I like the Rest is History podcast. That's
it's great. Podcasts are free.
Absolutely wonderful.
So there are ways of getting it. So there are positives as well. My worry always is let's say Turner was a little shy kid. Let's say Turner didn't have his dad. Let's say
promote
Turner,
him. Yeah, his dad did, didn't he? Yeah.
Well, and they were close.
Yes. Yeah.
Which was a rarity in working class families in that period. And Turner, who we'll be talking about in the next podcast, this is an era where there was no social mobility at all.
No.
But he got there because he was gutsy and he was determined and he was bolshy. He was quite often criticised for being bolshy.
Yes, yeah.
But let's worry about the kid who's not so bolshy.
Exactly, and there are plenty more of those.
There are, yeah.
And they may be indeed very talented as well.
Yeah.
They just don't have that kind of oomph, as it were. Yeah.
And that's what our podcast is going to be about: how to raise people up. How to take people and give them a free education in a way. So our podcast, we're hopefully, when we're talking about the next three artists we're talking about, who are going to be JMW Turner,
Ellis Lowry,
and Tracy Emin.
And
David Hockney we're going to be talking about. In the same way my channel is as well, I think it's a way of giving people a free education, because frankly, a lot of people can't afford education anymore because of cuts and because of the governments.
We get to go around the back door, don't we? Introduce these artists and their art to people without them having to find a library or anything like that, really.
Yeah. I mean, Leslie is taking Holbein and bringing them out to the people, and that's really important. I mean, I think really what we're trying to do with this podcast is grab a painting off a wall and take it out into the streets and show people. That's really what we're trying to do with this.
Those environments, museums, etc., those environments can be quite intimidating. Now, this is not the fault of the museums. Unfortunately, those museums such as the National Gallery, the Portrait Gallery, etc., quite a lot of museums, they were built a very long time ago, and they are stuck with this really imposing architecture. So they have to manage that imposing architecture. But we don't have to bother with the architecture, do we? Because we're all on YouTube and so on, and we can just bring you the art without having to negotiate this difficulty of the imposing buildings and so on.
I think what's really important is, both you and I, we have successful books. We've written books. We've risen from where we came from, etc. I think when you love something so much, you want other people to love it. And I think our aim really is to raise people up the way we were raised and give people the chances that we were given as well. Yeah. And the chance we can give people is art history.
I want people to be able to be in front of a painting and say that they absolutely hate it and they're going to tell me why. Or the same token that they absolutely love it and they're going to tell me why. But to be able to articulate what it is you don't like about something or what it is you do like about something, that's the goal. Yeah.
So on our last note now, we're going to say if you have any comments, please leave them in the comment box underneath this video, and also don't forget to like and subscribe. And pass it round to your friends.
We've only just begun, haven't we, James? Really?
As the carpenter said, we've only just begun.
We've only just begun, and there's a lot more to come.
Thank you very much.